March 15th, 1944, Northern Germany. A gray sky hangs low over the airfield near Brunswick. Bombers limp home through clouds of smoke, engines coughing, metal skin torn. On the ground, crews count the ones that don't return. The math never adds up. Everyone knows the rule of the sky. A damaged plane is a dead plane. But that night, one young pilot dares to ask a strange question. What if looking weak could make us strong? Soon, mechanics start painting fake bullet holes, fake fire, even fake oil leaks. It sounds insane until the enemy takes the bait. And what happens next will turn hunters into prey and change the air war forever. This is not fiction. This is a forgotten true story from World War II, a story of courage, deception, and imagination in the face of death. If you love real untold war stories like this, hit subscribe, like, and watch till the end. By early 1944, the skies over Germany had become a graveyard made of aluminum and fire. Every morning, hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators lifted from English fields, their engines shaking the cold air. Crews checked their oxygen masks, wrote quick notes home, and then disappeared into a wall of gray clouds. Some would never return. For months, the U.S. 8th Air Force had been losing bombers faster than it could replace them. The numbers were brutal. In February 1944 alone, more than 600 aircraft were lost in just 30 days. On bad days, nearly 1 in 5 bombers never made it back across the channel. That meant 10 men per plane, gunners, navigators, pilots, all gone in a single mission. Commanders called it the price of progress. Crews called it suicide with paperwork. The cause was not only German skill, but German patience. The Luftwaffe had learned a deadly rule. Don't waste ammunition on the front of a bomber stream. Wait until the formation begins to break. Find the slow one, the wounded, the smoking, the straggler, then strike. Radio reports from those last minutes were short and terrible. 2 engines gone, tail hit, fighters at 6 o'clock. Then silence. American engineers tried everything to stop it. Stronger armor, tighter formations, better gunners. But the results barely changed. For every improvement in steel or gun design, the Germans found a new weakness. Even when long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang began joining the raids, losses stayed high. Bomber crews still feared the moment when damage forced them out of formation. One navigator later said, "Once you fell behind, you could feel every German eye on you. It was like being the last car on the road when the wolves come out." The airfields back in England told the story. Empty bunks, plates still on mess tables, chaplains writing letters no one wanted to read. At the 359th Fighter Squadron, a support unit flying P-47 Thunderbolts, morale was falling. They watched bomber after bomber vanish and began to realize that defense alone would not win this air war. Something different was needed, something that broke the pattern. Inside the maintenance hangars, crews patched bullet holes with metal tape and fresh paint, the smell of solvents mixed with fuel and coffee. Technicians joked darkly about how many holes they could count on a lucky bomber. Each hole told a story of near death. But for one man, those holes also gave him an idea. Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss was not an engineer by training. Before the war, he had been an artist, a Cooper Union graduate who designed advertisements in New York City. He had drawn faces, shadows, reflections. He understood how the human eye could be fooled by shape and color. Now he worked under the wings of fighters, wiping oil off engines, his sketchbook tucked into a toolbox. He saw how pilots treated damage as death and how the enemy treated damage as invitation. Weiss began to wonder, if a crippled bomber attracted the hunters, what would happen if something pretended to be crippled? At first, it sounded absurd, even cruel. Why would anyone fake being damaged in a sky full of real death? But the logic had weight. The Germans had become predictable, their eyes trained for weakness. What if that weakness could be turned into bait? In the officers' club, Weiss mentioned it once, half serious, over a drink. The laughter was quick. One pilot said, "Hell, Danny, maybe next you'll sell us camouflage perfume." Another added, "Sure, paint bullet holes on our wings. That'll show 'em." But the joke didn't die. That night, Weiss went back to his bunk and began to draw. He sketched a fighter covered with painted scorch marks, fake panel tears, and even simulated oil streaks. He added a smoke generator hidden near the exhaust to make the engine look like it was failing. His notes read simply, "If they hunt the wounded, give them a wounded decoy." Outside, engines rumbled in the distance. Another wave returning from Germany, short of formation, their navigation lights flickering. Men walked toward the runway lights to count the survivors. The air war had reached a point where imagination mattered as much as firepower. Weiss didn't know it yet, but his strange idea would challenge not only tactics, but military tradition itself. For now, it was just a drawing on a stained napkin, an artist's answer to an engineer's problem. And in a war where illusion often killed truth, this illusion might just save lives. High above Europe, the war had become a contest of numbers, speed, altitude, and fuel. But for the German Luftwaffe, it was also a game of instinct. Their aces had learned to read the sky the way hunters read a forest. They could see weakness even from miles away. By 1944, German pilots no longer wasted ammunition fighting entire bomber formations head-on. Instead, they waited. From radio towers and radar posts, they watched the bomber streams move like metal rivers across the map. They knew the rhythm. The first bombers flew steady and strong, but after hours of flight, a few always began to lag. A damaged engine, a frozen turret, a wounded pilot. That was enough. The Luftwaffe called it Jagd auf die Lahmen, the hunt for the lame. They flew FW-19s and BF-19s in small packs, circling like wolves just outside the bomber's range. The moment a bomber fell out of formation, the pack dove in. Within seconds, cannon shells tore through thin aluminum skin. Luftwaffe pilot diaries often mentioned the same eerie moment, the silence before the kill. One German ace wrote, "When you see a lone bomber, you do not feel excitement. You feel certainty. It is already finished." That certainty was built on data. The German Air Command collected thousands of reports and found that stragglers were 5 times easier to destroy than bombers flying in tight formation. Even a 10% loss of airspeed made a plane vulnerable. They didn't need radar for that, just patience. For the Americans, this pattern was a nightmare. A single B-17 carried 10 men and cost $250,000 to build. Each mission required hundreds of mechanics, gallons of high-octane fuel, and long chains of logistics. And yet one small oil leak, one hit to the tail, could erase it all in a flash of smoke. Pilots called the moment of falling behind the loneliest sight in the world. One gunner remembered, "When the formation drifted away ahead of us, it felt like watching a ship sail off while you were drowning." And so, the German calculation worked. Every damaged bomber became a beacon, drawing in enemy fighters like sharks smelling blood. On the ground, American commanders tried to outthink this pattern. They changed radio codes, adjusted flight paths, and ordered escorts to stay close. But the Germans adapted again. They hid in the sun, attacking from above, or slipped below radar lines and climbed up behind the tail. In March 1944, an internal U.S. Air Force report showed that bomber losses were still near 5.2% per mission, far too high to sustain. Commanders could measure that number, but they couldn't measure fear. Fear was the hidden cost. Crews started flying tense, their hands shaking even before takeoff. At one English base, a chaplain counted 12 new graves after a single week. "We buried more than we baptized," he wrote in his journal, "and still the missions go on." It was in this atmosphere of exhaustion that Daniel Weiss's strange idea began to sound less crazy. When every plan failed, when every technical improvement still left men dying, even an artist's trick seemed worth listening to. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe kept refining its own deception. They painted false nose markings to confuse American gunners. They used radio mimicry to lure bombers off course. Deception, it turned out, worked both ways. The paradox of this air war was clear. The more advanced machines became, the more victory depended on psychology. It was not just about speed or firepower. It was about expectation. Whoever could control what the enemy expected could control the fight. Weiss's question suddenly fit that logic perfectly. If the Germans attacked weakness, then weakness could be turned into bait. A handful of fighter pilots from the 359th Squadron started whispering about it during maintenance hours. Could they really fool the Luftwaffe into attacking a wounded plane? "Wouldn't it be suicide?" Weiss answered with quiet confidence. "They already hunt the wounded," he said. "All we're doing is choosing which wounded they find." That line spread through the hangars. It carried a mix of humor and fear, but also something stronger, curiosity. And in war, curiosity often came before change. Outside, the spring sky was turning brighter, but the air still smelled of burnt oil. New bombers rolled onto the tarmac, shining and clean. None of the men who watched them knew that soon some of those planes would fly into battle already looking like they'd been hit. On purpose. This wasn't madness. It was strategy. This wasn't propaganda. It was survival. Daniel Weiss never planned to be a soldier. Before the war, he worked in a quiet art studio in New York City, sketching soap ads and car posters for an agency on Madison Avenue. His hands were made for pencils, not wrenches, but when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Weiss joined up like millions of others. Instead of painting faces, he began painting aircraft. At first, the Army didn't know what to do with an artist. He ended up as a maintenance technician, a crew chief with oil-stained hands and a clipboard. He learned to fix engines, patch bullet holes, and check propellers before every mission. It was hard, dirty work, but Weiss paid attention to small details: the sound of an engine under stress, the color of oil leaking from a cylinder, the way sunlight changed the look of metal. While others saw planes as machines, he saw them as shapes and shadows. His artist's eye noticed things most mechanics missed. When he walked past rows of bombers, he saw the marks of battle like brush strokes, black soot, silver scratches, brown rust. Each scar told a story of survival and fear. On cold March afternoon, Weiss sat on a crate behind Hangar 3, sketchbook on his knee. The air smelled of fuel and cigarettes. Overhead, a damaged B-17 limped in, one engine coughing black smoke. The plane's landing gear groaned as it touched down, sparks flying from the tire rims. Weiss watched quietly as medics ran toward it. He looked down at his pencil lines and thought, what if this could be turned around? What if the look of death could save life? Later that night, in the officers' club, Weiss shared his thought over whiskey with a few pilots. If they chase damaged planes, he said, maybe we can use that. Maybe we make a few planes look damaged and let them take the bait. The pilots laughed at first. So what next, Danny? One asked. We hang smoke bombs and call it art? Weiss only smiled. Maybe art's exactly what we need. The next morning, he started experimenting. He used leftover aircraft paint, dull grays and charcoals, and began painting fake bullet holes and scorch marks on an old P-47 wing panel. From a distance, the damage looked shockingly real. The trick was in the shading. Weiss darkened one edge of the fake hole to make it look deep. When sunlight hit the metal, Even experienced pilots couldn't tell the difference. Encouraged, he added more details: streaks of oil made from tar and engine grease, thin strips of bent metal glued over healthy panels to mimic hits. He even tested small smoke generators using chemical canisters borrowed from training stock. With a switch in the cockpit, the pilot could release a slow stream of gray smoke, enough to fool anyone watching from the ground or the sky. When Weiss presented his mock-up to the squadron commander, Captain James "Red" Holt, the room went silent. Holt studied the fake bullet holes closely, then laughed. "It's either genius or lunacy," he said, "but I'll admit, it looks real." The next step was harder: convincing command. Many officers thought it was a waste of time, even dangerous. One major warned, "You're asking men to fly into combat painted like targets." Another added, "You'll get them all killed before the Germans do." But Weiss didn't back down. He explained that decoy flights could fly behind real bomber groups, pretending to be stragglers. Enemy fighters would dive on them, and that's when hidden escort fighters could pounce. It was risky, yes, but every mission already was. "Right now," Weiss said quietly, "we're dying predictably. I'd rather live unpredictably." His plan made its way up the chain of command. Some higher officers dismissed it immediately. Others were intrigued but cautious. A few saw potential. The Air Force had experimented with deception before: fake radio chatter, dummy airfields, even wooden bombers to confuse enemy scouts. Maybe, they thought, this strange artist's idea could work too. While the paperwork moved through offices, Weiss kept testing in secret. He and a few volunteers painted one fighter to look half-ruined and taxied it out to the field. Pilots from nearby squadrons stopped and stared. One of them said, "Who the hell let that wreck near the runway?" That reaction proved the point. Even trained eyes were fooled. For Weiss, that was enough. He didn't know if the Air Force would ever approve his plan, but he knew one thing for certain. In war, imagination could sometimes do what logic could not. In the months ahead, that imagination would be tested in the most dangerous airspace in the world. But for now, in a quiet hangar lit by oil lamps, an artist with paint-stained hands had unknowingly designed a trap that would soon change the air war forever. March 15th, 1944. A freezing evening at Bottisham Airfield, England. The officers' club was warm with cigarette smoke and the low hum of voices. Tin mugs clinked, boots scuffed across wooden floors, and rain tapped the windows. Outside, the air smelled of oil and wet grass. Another mission finished, another list of names missing. Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss sat at the end of the bar, sketchbook in hand, nursing a weak whiskey. He'd spent the day painting fake bullet holes on a P-47 panel for a test. Most men laughed, but a few stayed to watch. Now, in the corner of the club, his idea began to take a clearer shape. Across from him sat Captain James "Red" Holt, tall, broad-shouldered, red hair fading under his cap. Holt had flown 26 missions already and lost 3 wingmen. He wasn't a man who believed easily in miracles. Still, Weiss's calm tone made him listen. Weiss tore a page from his sketchbook, placed it on the bar, and drew quickly. "Imagine this," he said, "a P-47 that looks half dead. Smoke trailing, fake oil leaks, patched holes. The Germans see it and can't resist. They dive in close." He tapped the napkin with his pencil. But behind it, waiting out of sight, our fighters. Holt leaned over the napkin, frowning. "So the wounded bird is the bait?" "Exactly," Weiss replied. "We give them something to chase, and then we turn the trap on." The idea spread through the club like spilled whiskey. Pilots gathered around the napkin, half amused, half curious. Someone laughed. "You're out of your mind, Danny. The brass will court-martial you for painting a warplane like a circus act." But Holt didn't laugh. He kept staring at the sketch, his eyes narrowing. "If it works," he said slowly, We could save a lot of bombers. That night, Weiss stayed up in the maintenance hut, turning the napkin sketch into detailed blueprints. He measured paint patterns, smoke release angles, and even airflow changes. The smell of thinner filled the room. On a scrap of paper, he wrote a single sentence that summed up the plan: deceive the eye, control the fight. The next morning, Holt took Weiss's drawings to his superior, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Dickman. The colonel studied them in silence. He'd seen hundreds of wild ideas: flamethrower planes, self-heating bullets, invisible paint, most of which ended in disaster. But this one had something different. It didn't promise magic. It promised psychology. War isn't only about strength, Weiss said when called in. It's about what the enemy believes he sees. Dickman exhaled through his nose, then nodded. All right, you'll get 2 test aircraft, limited trial only. If it fails, this never happened. And so, the decoy project was born. Unofficial, unrecorded, and completely experimental. Weiss and his small team began work immediately. They mixed black pigment with engine oil to make realistic scorch marks. They attached metal strips that could shake in the wind like damaged panels. They installed smoke canisters beneath the cowling, wired to a cockpit switch. The first time they tested it, a passing pilot radioed in, "Your bird's on fire, get it down." The illusion worked. Soon, word spread through nearby bases. Men came to see the ghost plane, a healthy fighter that looked half dead. Some pilots were fascinated. Others called it crazy. "You're turning us into decoys," one said bitterly. Weiss only answered, "Better to be a live decoy than a dead target." The test flights were risky. The fake damage changed the way air flowed around the plane, making it harder to control. Pilots had to learn to fly wrong, slightly off balance, nose down, engine underpowered, to sell the act. Weiss created a checklist for them. Feather 1 propeller halfway, trim tail 3 degrees off center, release smoke every 30 seconds, keep radio silence until attacked. Each instruction was designed to fool the enemy's eyes, not to impress headquarters. Captain Holt volunteered to fly the first live trial. As he climbed into the cockpit, Weiss handed him the napkin sketch, now folded and yellowed. "Keep this," he said. "It started as a drawing. Let's make it history." The fake damaged fighter roared into the cloudy sky, wobbling just enough to look weak. Within minutes, radar picked up German interceptors heading toward it. Holt's voice crackled on the radio. "Looks like they bought the show." Moments later, silence, then gunfire, then Holt's calm reply, "Scratch 2." When he landed, his grin told the story. The trap had worked. That night, Weiss pinned the napkin sketch to the wall above his bunk. The ink had smudged, but the idea was alive, and soon it would change how the enemy saw the sky itself. By early April 1944, the decoy project had moved from an idea on a napkin to a hidden workshop behind Hangar 3 at Bottisham Airfield. The hangar doors stayed closed most of the time, with guards posted outside. Inside, the air smelled of paint, rubber, and cigarette smoke. A single sign hung over the door: "Maintenance only, keep out." Daniel Weiss and his small crew, 4 mechanics, 1 electrician, and a pilot volunteer, worked day and night. They knew they weren't just building planes. They were building illusions strong enough to fool trained killers. Every rivet, every paint mark, every puff of smoke had to look perfectly wrong. Weiss began each morning the same way, with a chalkboard sketch. The trick, he'd say, is not to make the plane look destroyed, but to make it look just damaged enough to be believable. Too much smoke and it looked fake. Too little and it fooled no one. He studied real wrecks in the scrapyard to understand how damage looked. Burn marks around bullet holes, uneven dents, cracked plexiglass. The men joked that he was an artist painting death. Weiss just nodded. "If I can copy what death looks like," he said quietly, "maybe fewer men will meet it." The team gave each decoy fighter its own story. One had a fake fuel leak, another had a wing patched with silver foil. They used special oil that left black stains down the fuselage. An electrician named Mac built a smoke release system using spare parts from a signal flare launcher. When switched on, the smoke drifted like engine fire. Weiss kept testing everything in small steps. He'd walk 50 yards away, squint through binoculars and ask, "Would you shoot that?" If the answer was yes, the illusion was working. But not everyone liked the project. One evening, a group of officers arrived for inspection. The senior one, Colonel Branson, didn't hide his anger. "You're turning airmen into bait," he barked. "You want them to pretend to be dying so others can ambush the enemy?" Weiss didn't back down. "Sir," he said, "they're already dying. This gives them a way to strike back." The room went silent. Even the colonel didn't answer right away. Finally, he muttered, "If this fails, it's on your head, Sergeant." Weiss nodded. "It already is." By mid-April, the first squadron was secretly briefed on how to fly with the decoys. Weiss stood in front of 30 pilots, holding his napkin sketch like a battle flag. He explained how the decoy would fly slightly behind the bomber formation, wobbling as if damaged. When German fighters moved in for the easy kill, hidden escorts above the clouds would dive at them. "You'll look weak," he said. "That's the point. You'll make them believe they have the advantage. But remember, you control the illusion." One young pilot raised his hand. "What if they don't take the bait?" Weiss smiled faintly. "Then you've still come home alive." The first live test came on April 22, 1944. 2 damaged P-47s and 4 cover fighters took off at dawn. The sky was gray and empty at first. Then radar picked up enemy movement. 6 German FW-190s. From the command post, Weiss watched through binoculars as the decoy planes began trailing smoke. The Germans saw them and dove in tight formation, guns flashing. Just as planned, the cover fighters dropped from above and opened fire. It was over in seconds. 3 FW-19s fell in flames. The rest fled. Both decoys returned safely, one with a few real holes this time. When the planes rolled to a stop, Weiss ran to the runway. The pilots climbed out, grinning and shaking their heads. One of them, Lieutenant Davis, handed Weiss a bullet fragment. "Looks like your painting fooled them good," he said. Word of the mission spread fast, even though, officially, it never happened. Pilots began asking for Weiss markings, fake burn streaks, and patch paint that made their planes look damaged but alive. Mechanics learned to mix soot with grease for more realistic stains. Soon, the illusion became an art form. Some crews even gave names to their fake damaged planes: Broken Angel, Lucky Wreck, the Bait Bird. Weiss didn't care about fame or jokes. He just wanted fewer names on the missing lists. Every night, he checked casualty reports and quietly counted how many men had come home. By May, the decoy project had saved at least 12 crews in confirmed missions. The official reports listed the results under vague phrases like unexpected enemy losses or misidentified targets. But among the pilots, one phrase became legend: Weiss saved another one. Still, Weiss knew what was coming next: bigger missions, more eyes watching, and commanders who would soon demand results on paper, not just in whispers. The illusion was working, but war had a way of turning good tricks into dangerous habits, and Weiss was about to learn that success could attract the wrong kind of attention. By June 1944, Weiss's strange little experiment had spread far beyond Bottisham Airfield. What started as one hidden hangar project was now being tested across several U.S. fighter groups in England. Commanders who once laughed at the idea were suddenly asking for training in visual deception. The reports were impossible to ignore. In 1 month, the squadrons using fake damaged planes recorded 40 confirmed kills, while losing fewer than 5 of their own. That ratio stunned everyone. For the first time, American fighters were turning the Luftwaffe's favorite hunting tactic against them. At first, it was still unofficial. Weiss's name appeared nowhere in the files. The paperwork simply called it Operational Camouflage Type 3. But everyone on the ground knew what it really was, the art of being weak on purpose. Each morning, the mechanics gathered around the same workbench, now covered in paint tins and soot jars instead of wrenches, the smell of turpentine mixed with gasoline. They argued about details, whether the fake oil leaks should run darker, whether bullet holes looked too clean. Weiss often walked between them, checking angles under sunlight, reminding them that German eyes were sharp. "It has to look desperate," he'd say, "but not dying." The trick had become part science, part theater. Pilots were trained to fly like they were hurt. Uneven movements, slow turns, limping patterns. Some even switched off one engine for a few seconds to sell the illusion. Every move was rehearsed. "Fighters used to fight by instinct," Weiss told one crew, "but now you fight by performance." The results spoke louder than any speech. During one mission over France, 2 Fock-damaged Mustangs dragged a group of 12 German fighters straight into a trap. From the clouds above, 8 American P-51s dove and wiped them out in minutes. The Germans never realized they'd been fooled until it was too late. One pilot, Lieutenant Paul Grady, described it later. "They came in grinning, thinking they'd finish easy kills. But when we dropped from the sun, their smiles turned to panic. It was over before I even heard the first explosion." The paradox was sharp. By pretending to be broken, the Americans had become stronger. What once meant defeat now meant opportunity. The Luftwaffe's own habits had become their weakness. Even German reports showed confusion. Intercepted radio messages included phrases like, "The enemy shows damage but flies perfectly," and "Some bombers appear hit but maneuver abnormally well." Well, now they began to suspect new armor, new engines, anything but the truth. Behind the front lines, Allied intelligence officers noticed the same pattern. Luftwaffe pilots were wasting time and fuel chasing ghosts. Their kill rates dropped nearly 20% that summer. What looked like luck on paper was really Weiss's deception at work. Soon, higher headquarters came calling. Weiss was summoned to a meeting at Duxford, where senior officers wanted an explanation. He arrived nervous, his uniform still stained with paint. The room was full of colonels and majors studying charts. One of them asked, "Sergeant Weiss, can you tell us how you're tricking the Luftwaffe?" Weiss hesitated, then said simply, "Sir, we're teaching them to see what isn't there and to ignore what is." A long silence followed. Then the lead officer nodded. "Keep doing it," he said, "but keep it quiet." From that day, Weiss's project was given new supplies and coded status. Visual Deception Unit became the official name, but among pilots it was just called the Ghost Factory. Success, however, brought new pressure. Some commanders wanted bigger traps, full bomber formations painted with fake battle scars, even staged smoke trails for reconnaissance photos. Weiss warned them, "The more we fake, the less they'll believe. Too much illusion kills trust," but not everyone listened. The military loved results, and this trick was giving results faster than any new engine or weapon. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe began to adapt again. They learned to hesitate, to watch targets longer before diving. This slowed their attacks, but also made the air war feel eerier. Long moments of tension, like predators unsure if the prey was real. One American gunner later said, "It was strange. Some days we flew all the way to Germany with smoke pouring out behind us, and no one came. We realized the Germans were scared of our damage." By late summer, what had begun as a desperate act of imagination was reshaping aerial combat itself. Weiss's team didn't just fool the enemy. They changed the rules of engagement. They proved that deception could save as many lives as firepower. Yet Weiss himself grew quieter. He often stood at the edge of the runway at dusk, watching the sky fade orange and gray. All this, he once whispered to a friend, because we learned to lie better than they could see. The war would move on. New machines, new weapons, new strategies. But the lesson of that small, smoky hangar would outlast them all. Because in war, truth is not always power. Sometimes it's the illusion that wins. July 1944. The English countryside was warm and green, but at Bottigam Airfield there was no peace. Every dawn began the same way, engines growling, air thick with the smell of oil and coffee. Crews stood around their planes, faces dark with exhaustion and determination. The decoy squadron was now a legend whispered across air bases. Their reputation wasn't written in newspapers. It was written in the sky, in trails of smoke that fooled the enemy, and in the black dots of German fighters falling to earth. In just 4 weeks, Weiss's deception tactics had helped shoot down 40 enemy fighters. The squadron's logbook called it extraordinary success. The men called it sweet revenge. Each mission followed a rhythm now, carefully planned and dangerously unpredictable. The decoy planes flew slightly apart from the main formation, dragging fake smoke or showing false burn marks. German fighters, hungry for easy kills, took the bait almost every time. But the real strength was in timing. Hidden escort fighters waited above the clouds, silent and unseen. When the Germans dived in, confident they were finishing off wounded bombers, the sky exploded. Engines screamed, tracer bullets streaked, and in seconds the hunters became the hunted. One pilot, Lieutenant Mark Hensley, later said, "We didn't just fight them, we played them." Every fight started with their mistake. For the first time, the Luftwaffe began losing more than they could replace. Fuel was scarce, pilots were young and inexperienced, and morale was crumbling. American pilots noticed the change. The once feared German aces were flying shorter engagements, retreating faster. Yet the victories didn't come without cost. Flying as bait was still one of the most dangerous roles. Even with smoke machines and fake paint, the illusion could quickly turn real. One unlucky bullet could turn make-believe damage into a deadly explosion. On July 19th, Captain Ray Fowler's decoy plane took a direct hit during a trap run. His wing caught fire, and this time it wasn't smoke oil. It was the real thing. His radio crackled with panic, but his cover fighters were too far to help. Fowler tried to glide back toward the channel, but the flames spread fast. Before he could bail out, the plane broke apart in midair. Weiss saw it from the command post. The wreck spiraled down like a burning leaf. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Weiss turned away and said quietly, "That's one more name for the price of imagination." The next morning, the crew painted Fowler's plane number on the hangar wall, not as a memorial, but as a reminder. Every illusion had a cost. Still, the squadron kept flying. They couldn't stop. Each mission felt like both revenge and survival. The German radio network began calling them Die Geisterstaffel, the Ghost Squadron. Pilots who survived the ambushes told stories of bombers that looked crippled but fought like devils. Fear spread faster than facts. By the end of July, German command had changed tactics again. Fighter patrols were ordered to verify damage from a distance before engaging. But that delay was enough to tip the balance of the air war. Every second of hesitation gave the Americans time to position, climb, and strike first. For the men of the 359th Squadron, success brought mixed emotions. They laughed and cheered when enemy planes went down, but they also carried the weight of those they'd lost. They knew the truth. Every victory meant someone else had played bait that day, risking everything to make the illusion real. One ground mechanic described it best in a letter home. "You can paint fake damage all you want, but it's the pilot who makes it real. Those boys don't just fly planes, they fly stories, stories we hope end with them coming back. When the squadron's monthly report reached headquarters, it listed the numbers coldly. Enemy aircraft destroyed, 40. Own losses, 4. There were no lines for fear, courage, or imagination. But in the hangars, men knew what it meant. The fake wounds painted on metal had turned into real strength. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, not just from victory, but from belief. They had found a way to fight that didn't depend on luck or brute force, but on creativity. One evening, as the sun set behind the airfield, Weiss walked along the runway, the sound of distant engines fading. A young pilot asked him, "Sir, do you think they'll remember us for this?" Weiss looked toward the orange horizon and said softly, "If they remember, it won't be for the kills. It'll be for proving that even in war, imagination can save lives." Behind him, the hangar doors creaked shut, hiding rows of planes painted with scars, beautiful lies that had changed the course of a brutal sky war. And as night fell, the sound of hammers and brushes began again. Tomorrow, there would be new missions, new traps, and new ghosts in the clouds. The illusion had become reality. August 1944. The war in Europe was changing fast. The Allies had landed in Normandy and were pushing deeper into France. The German Air Force, once feared and untouchable, was now on the defensive. But at Bottisham Airfield, Daniel Weiss and his Ghost Squadron still worked quietly, painting false damage and preparing traps in the morning mist. By now, everyone in the unit knew that Weiss's idea had saved lives. What began as one man's strange art experiment had become an accepted tactic. Commanders stopped calling it crazy and started calling it psychological advantage. Reports showed enemy losses rising, morale improving, and bomber survival rates climbing above 94%. But Weiss didn't celebrate. The hangar walls were lined with names of the men who hadn't come back, pilots who flew as decoys, who risked too much to keep the illusion alive. He often looked at those names before starting another day of work. Every trick costs something, he told his mechanic, even the ones that work. As the months went on, the decoy program evolved. Crews developed better smoke systems, adjustable paint layers, and even small mirrors to catch sunlight and make a plane look like it was losing parts. The air smelled of oil, paint thinner, and coffee. The ground was sticky with soot. Every night, mechanics cleaned their brushes and prayed that tomorrow's missions would return with all pilots alive. Weiss was promoted quietly. No medal ceremony, no fanfare. Official files listed him as Technical Sergeant, Visual Deception Division. But among the pilots, he was simply the man who fooled the Luftwaffe. He never boasted about the 40 enemy fighters destroyed in 1 month. Instead, he spoke about the lives saved. "A plane is just metal," he said, "but a man, that's something you can't rebuild." The paradox of his work grew deeper with time. To protect life, Weiss had to make things look broken. To create safety, he had to create fear. Not for his own side, but for the enemy. It was an artist's war inside a soldier's world. By September, the Luftwaffe had changed again. They stopped chasing wounded planes altogether. They began focusing on large bomber groups instead. In a strange way, Weiss's success ended its own usefulness. The illusion had worked so well that the enemy finally stopped believing it. When headquarters ordered the end of the decoy program, Weiss didn't argue. He simply nodded, cleaned his paintbrushes one last time, and walked through the hangar one final evening. The air was still and smelled of dried paint and engine oil. On the wall, under the names of fallen pilots, he wrote one more sentence in chalk: "Truth can kill, lies can save." The next day, the Ghost Squadron was reassigned to escort duties. The hangar that once held fake damaged planes was turned into a regular repair shop. Weiss was transferred to a supply unit in Belgium, far from the skies that had once carried his illusions. But the story didn't end there. After the war, intelligence reports revealed that German pilots had written about the ghost planes in their diaries. One entry read, "They looked half dead, yet they fought like demons." We never knew which was real. Weiss's work had changed how both sides saw the air war. He proved that technology alone didn't win battles. Imagination did. Long after the shooting stopped, military academies quietly studied his deception tactics. Future generations learned how visual misinformation could shape outcomes without firing a single bullet. In 1946, Weiss visited Bottisham again. The airfield was quiet, overgrown with weeds. The hangars were empty, the runways cracked. He stood in front of the same wall where he'd written that chalk line. The words had faded, but traces were still there. He smiled sadly. Maybe that's all history is, he said to himself, old paint that refuses to fade completely. He left his cap on a dusty workbench and walked away. Decades later, when historians looked back at the strange month when one squadron painted fake wounds to destroy 40 enemy fighters, they called it one of the most unusual psychological operations of the air war. But for the men who lived it, it was simpler. It was about survival, about turning fear into a weapon, about proving that creativity could stand beside courage. They had come as soldiers and artists. They left as something in between, storytellers of the sky. Because in the end, Weiss's greatest lesson wasn't about tricking the enemy. It was about understanding the mind, knowing that in war, what you see can be more powerful than what's real. The illusion had saved lives, and that, in the cruel logic of war, was victory enough. In the end, Weiss once said, the sharpest weapon wasn't steel or fire, it was imagination.